It was 2:30 in the morning when she left the voicemail that actually made me laugh out loud. I was sitting in Tyler's living room, beer in hand, completely unbothered, while Kendra was still camped on my front porch, crying, yelling, pressing her face against the window like a confused raccoon in mascara, not yet aware that the locks had been changed, her things were in a storage unit, and everything she thought she was coming home to had quietly, methodically, permanently ceased to exist. I watched it all on the security camera like it was the best show I'd seen in years. She had been gone 5 days to Cabo, not the girls' trip she'd sold me, but a full couples retreat with a gym trainer named Brandon while I sat home walking the dog she never fed and working on the car she made fun of. I'd seen the photos in our shared cloud. I'd read the messages where she called me boring, said I was holding her back, and wrote that she was waiting for the right moment to leave, but needed to make sure she had a place to land first. Not a partner, a landing pad. So when that voicemail came through at 2:30 a.m., her voice cracking with the righteous fury of someone who had just realized the safety net was gone, and she said, "Maybe I've been settling all along. Brandon actually sees my worth. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you gave up." I saved it immediately, because something told me it was going to be very useful someday. Owen is a 31-year-old HVAC technician living in Phoenix, Arizona. A man who has quietly built a life that many would envy, but few would Instagram. He earns around $85,000 a year repairing furnaces and fixing air conditioners, work that doesn't land him on magazine covers or private jets, but it's honest, steady, and pays every single one of his bills without apology. What sets Owen apart isn't just his income, it's what he's done with it. While most people his age are still splitting rent with roommates or crashing on relatives' couches, Owen owns a 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of Phoenix, purchased smart when the market dipped, and he's been renovating it room by room ever since. He taught himself to tile the master bathroom by watching YouTube videos and saved himself $15,000 in labor costs in the process. That's not luck. That's the kind of quiet resourcefulness that defines him. His garage is his sanctuary, packed wall to wall with tools that actually get used, not decorative gear hanging for show. He's got solid connections across the trades, electricians, plumbers, guys he can call when a project takes an unexpected turn, like the time a kitchen renovation nearly became an indoor swimming pool. Out back, there's a fire pit he built himself, a spot to gather with friends and decompress after long shifts that sometimes stretch into 2 in the morning. Parked beside it sits his most prized possession, a 1987 Camaro Z28, a weekend project he's poured years into, dropped in a new engine, reworked the suspension, added a custom exhaust, nothing showy, just a sharp, smooth classic that earns a second glance every time it rolls onto the street. Owen isn't flashy, he isn't chasing status or performing a version of himself for anyone's benefit. He's a man who knows exactly who he is, practical, capable, grounded, and genuinely proud of what he's built with his own 2 hands. And that's exactly the kind of stability that attracted Kendra into his life. She was 28, a dental hygienist pulling in around $155,000 a year with immaculate presentation, an encyclopedic knowledge of trendy brunch spots, and a magnetic, polished energy that initially swept Owen off his feet. They'd met at a barbecue through mutual friends, dated for a year and a half, and when her lease ended, she moved in. It seemed like the natural next step, 2 people building something together, sharing space and expenses, leaning into a future. But from the very beginning, the cracks were visible to everyone except the man who was falling for her. Kendra's glamour was a carefully curated surface, and underneath it lived someone with zero impulse control around money, a habit of treating Owen's home like a revolving door social lounge, and a group of friends who seemed to exist primarily to compete with each other's highlight reels. Owen didn't ignore these signs out of stupidity, he ignored them out of something far more human: hope. He convinced himself that chemistry was enough, that her quirks were manageable, that love could absorb the friction. This opening chapter of his story is, at its core, a portrait of a good man at the exact moment before his world begins to quietly unravel around him, and the quiet dignity he carries into the storm ahead. Moving in together has a way of dissolving every carefully maintained illusion a person projects during the dating phase, and with Kendra, The dissolving happened fast. The woman who had carried herself like she'd never once Googled how to tell if milk had gone bad turned out to be someone who left dishes soaking in the sink for days, not because they needed loosening, as she claimed, but because she simply didn't want to deal with them. Owen would come home from a 2 in the morning HVAC emergency, running purely on exhaustion and cold coffee, and by 7, Kendra would be blasting pop music through the house like she was warming up for a stadium tour. When he asked her to keep it down, she'd shrug and say music helped her focus before work. Owen's response was dry but fair. Cleaning teeth didn't exactly require a concert-level warm-up playlist. Then there were the surprise guests, her friends sprawling across his couch with hard seltzers like his living room was a bar tab he hadn't agreed to open. She'd flash that signature innocent smile and casually mention she'd forgotten to tell him they were stopping by. Owen's home, the one he'd bought, renovated, and maintained with his own labor, had somehow become a drop-in social venue without his consent. But the single biggest issue, the one that ground against Owen the most, was the money. Kendra earned around $155,000 a year, a salary that should have left her more than comfortable. And yet, by the third week of every single month, she was completely broke. Not budget-tight broke, vanished into the atmosphere broke. Owen would check their shared grocery card and find $180 at Sephora, $95 on supplements from some influencer's website, and a trail of brunch receipts from places with neon signs and $22 cocktails. When he'd bring it up, she'd pivot straight into self-care justifications, as though dental patients were scrutinizing her contour and her Brazilian blowout. Her friend group mirrored the same energy. All late 20s, all working in health or beauty, all silently competing in an unspoken race to have the most photogenic lifestyle. Weekends meant staged Instagram shots at overpriced restaurants, cocktails ordered for the photo and barely touched. And running the show over all of them was Vivian. Pharmaceutical sales, BMW she had no business financing, and a talent for delivering passive commentary like a precision weapon. Every time she came over, she'd glance around Owen's house and call it cozy, which was code for modest and beneath Kendra's potential. She'd nudge Kendra with lines like, "Why tie yourself down so early? You've got so much ahead of you." Owen brushed it off. When it was just the two of them, things were genuinely good. Real chemistry, the kind that makes you rationalize a lot of warning signs. There was also the practical reality that sharing expenses helped. But the warning signs were stacking up quietly, one on top of another. The phone she'd taken to the bathroom at every dinner, the doctors and coworkers she'd mentioned just a beat too casually, the night her father asked about Owen's career goals and she jumped in to call him reliable, in the same tone someone uses to describe a used appliance they're not sure they want to keep. The Cabo trip didn't arrive as a sudden dramatic demand. It crept into the relationship slowly, the way most betrayals do, disguised at first as something harmless. Kendra started soft-launching the idea weeks before it became a real conversation, dropping it into passing comments like a test balloon she was nudging into the air to see if it would float. The girls had found a resort. Wouldn't it be fun? Sounds incredible. Owen would nod, offer a casual, "Sounds fun," and think nothing more of it, treating it the way he treated every other ambitious hypothetical that never materialized, like when people say they should open a coffee shop someday, and everyone agrees and no one ever does anything about it. But then Vivian, naturally, put down a deposit and locked the group in. That's when Cabo went from casual daydream to recurring topic. Suddenly, it was in every conversation. The upgraded suites, the ocean view pool, the need to book before Friday, the burnout that apparently required a $2,800 resort as the only valid cure. Owen had to sit with that number for a moment. $2,800 per person, not counting extras. For that kind of money, he could have restocked every tool in his work van and still taken himself out for a proper dinner. But the real conversation came on a regular Tuesday night. They were mid-binge on some show Kendra liked when she hit pause on the remote. That pause alone was a signal. Nobody stops a stream unless something significant is about to land. She turned to him with the tone people use when they've already made a decision but want the other person to feel like a participant in making it. She wanted to go. The girls had been planning it forever. They'd been in each other's space too much, she said, and a little distance might make them miss each other. Owen kept his expression steady, asked who was going, and that's when the story started developing cracks. She listed the usual girls, but then admitted Vivian was bringing Dorian, and Jocelyn might bring her new guy, Trent, so not exactly a girls-only trip. When Owen asked why he wasn't being invited, she hesitated, just a beat, but enough, and pivoted to saying he wouldn't enjoy it anyway. Crowded beaches, overpriced drinks, not his vibe. And she wasn't entirely wrong about that, but the way she said it, like he was a grumpy background character who would ruin her poolside glamour, landed differently than she intended. He told her to go. She hugged him like he'd handed her a permission slip. Over the following weeks, trip prep consumed her entirely. 3 new swimsuits, stacks of sundresses, enough skincare products to supply a small spa. The bathroom looked like a Sephora stockroom. She was glued to her phone constantly, messages popping in from names Owen didn't recognize. One evening, her phone buzzed on the counter and the preview lit up, "Brandon can't wait to see you in that blue dress." She snatched the phone and explained it away as Samantha's boyfriend reacting to outfit photos in the group chat. The answer was smooth, almost rehearsed, and that rehearsed quality was exactly what bothered him most. Owen filed it away quietly and kept watching. Owen wasn't the kind of man who went looking for trouble without reason, but once the signs began accumulating, the unfamiliar name in the message preview, the phone she never let out of arm's reach, the fights that erupted out of nowhere in the week before her flight, his instincts wouldn't let him rest. Kendra had started picking arguments over absolutely nothing during those final days. A coffee mug left in the sink became a federal case. A simple question about dinner triggered an eye roll. One night on the couch, she snapped at him for breathing too loudly, and Owen replied with quiet sarcasm that he'd look into upgrading to the silent package. The breaking point came when he used the last splash of milk in his coffee. She reacted like he'd drained a savings account. She called it stress, work stress, trip stress, and said she'd feel better once she unwound. The night before her departure, they had Chinese takeout, and she barely looked up from her phone for the entire meal, chopsticks in one hand, screen in the other. Around midnight, her phone was still buzzing. She called it group chat chaos over last-minute packing details. He offered to drive her to the airport in the morning. She waved it off, said the Uber was fine. A quick kiss goodbye, the usual script, and she was gone. For the first day or two, Kendra's social posts looked exactly like what she described. Resort balcony views, poolside drinks, scenic photos, normal travel content. Then day 3 arrived, and Owen's eye caught something in a story she uploaded from a beachside club. A man he didn't recognize stood behind her, palm resting just above her waist, solidly in the not accidental zone. Owen screenshotted it immediately. He told himself clubs were packed and contact happened, but he'd already started watching more carefully. Then Jocelyn posted a group photo, everyone neatly paired off like a couple's retreat. Vivian with Dorian, Jocelyn with Trent, Mira with a new face, Samantha with someone else. And right there, unmistakable, Kendra pressed into a man with tattooed shoulders, his arm wrapped around her waist like he belonged there, her leaning in like gravity wasn't a concern anymore. That image hit Owen like a freight train at full speed. This wasn't a girls' trip, it was a couple's getaway with a fake cover story. He identified the man quickly. Brandon, the same Brandon from the text about the blue dress, a trainer at Kendra's gym, the one she'd recently become suspiciously passionate about yoga for. Owen could have called, could have sent a barrage of furious messages. Instead, he went to work, knocked out 3 HVAC repairs, came home, fed Bruno, and thought clearly. Step 1. The shared cloud storage Kendra didn't know they still had linked. She'd never bothered to understand how it worked, which meant every photo she took had been quietly syncing to their joint account. And what Owen found there wasn't just evidence of a vacation fling, it was a full, documented, months-long relationship. Airport embraces, candlelit dinners, hotel selfies, and worst of all, a cheap ring on her left hand that was not the promise ring he'd given her for Christmas, the one that had made her cry. What Owen found in that shared cloud wasn't just the proof of a betrayal, it was the complete unraveling of a story he had believed in. The photos went back weeks before Cabo. There were candlelit dinners he'd never heard about, beach day selfies from days Kendra had claimed to be working late, hotel room photos from her so-called girls' nights. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a tequila-fueled vacation fling. This was a deliberate, sustained, parallel relationship that Kendra had been running with the same organizational energy she never once applied to washing a dish. And then came the synced text messages, which Owen read with the slow, awful clarity of someone watching a building collapse in real time. Kendra telling Brandon she'd break up with Owen after the trip so things wouldn't get messy. Brandon saying he couldn't wait until it was just the two of them. Kendra calling Owen a nice guy who was holding her back. Brandon agreeing that he seemed boring. And then the one that sealed everything shut. Kendra writing that she was waiting for the right moment to leave but wanted to make sure she had a place to land first. Not a partner, a landing pad. A pit stop between where she was and wherever she'd decided she was going without him. Owen sat in the garage for a long time after that. Bruno curled up at his feet, tail still, like even the dog understood the weight of what had just been discovered. Owen cracked a beer and thought, not in anger, not in grief, but with the cold, focused clarity of a man who had made up his mind. He called off work the next morning and gave himself the entire day to execute what he privately called Operation Final Goodbye. First stop, his bank. He walked in and removed Kendra from every shared financial account with the calm energy of someone running a routine errand. Kendra was never on the house title. They'd never gotten that far, which meant every cent he'd earned fixing systems in attics and crawl spaces remained exactly where it belonged. Next came her belongings. Owen didn't throw anything out the window or scatter her wardrobe across the yard in a cinematic rage spiral. He folded every piece of clothing carefully, wrapped her breakables in tissue like a holiday gift packer, and boxed everything up with quiet precision. Her jewelry got its own box, except the promise ring he'd given her. That went back into his safe, where it had always belonged. He loaded everything into his truck and dropped it at a storage unit near her office, prepaid 3 months under her name, and mailed the key to her workplace. Then he rekeyed every lock in the house. $200 worth of hardware store satisfaction that felt like the best investment he'd made in months. His neighbor Jim spotted him in the store loading up a cart and asked if he was moving out. Owen smiled and said he was helping his ex move out. Jim slapped him on the back and called him a smart man. Back at home, Owen reclaimed every inch of his space. The spare room that had become Kendra's graveyard of unopened Amazon returns was now a home gym again. His tools had breathing room in the garage. The living room was rearranged for function instead of filtered photo opportunities. Bruno followed him from room to room with his tail wagging like he'd been waiting months for this exact version of his owner to show back up. Kendra came home on day 5 expecting the familiar comfort of a life she had quietly decided to exit on her own terms and her own timeline. What she found instead was a key that no longer worked, a front door that didn't budge, and silence from the man she had assumed would be waiting in exactly the same place she'd left him. Owen, meanwhile, was at his buddy Tyler's house watching the game, phone completely powered off, entirely unbothered. It was Tyler's wife, Sarah, who broke the news. She walked into the room holding her phone with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a slow-motion disaster and wasn't sure whether to be horrified or entertained. She flipped the screen to show Kendra's Instagram story, which had evolved in real time into a full public meltdown. First clip, Kendra standing on the porch, face pressed against the window like a confused raccoon wearing mascara, captioned, "Locked out, where is everyone?" Second story, "Honestly don't know what's going on." Third, a full crying selfie, face red, eyes swollen, captioned, "Worst day ever, can't get in, Owen's not answering." Sarah looked at Owen with an expression somewhere between disbelief and judgment. Owen shrugged. "She made her bed, I just took the sheets." Tyler handed him a beer and raised it like a toast. The security camera footage Owen reviewed the next morning was better than anything on television. Kendra had pulled up around 6, hopped out of her car with the breezy confidence of someone who expected a warm welcome, and stuck her key in the lock. The smile dissolved the second it didn't turn. What followed was a one-woman performance of confusion, frustration, and escalating panic, pacing the porch, jiggling every window, eventually sitting down on the front steps and crying while dialing her phone. Then, around 8 o'clock, she reached into the mailbox and pulled out the note Owen had slipped in before heading to Tyler's, a note he'd completely forgotten about until that moment. In about 10 seconds, her face cycled through mild confusion, total shock, and full-blown panic. The note was short and precise. "Kendra, Hope Cabo was everything you dreamed with Brandon. Your stuff's at a storage unit on Miloff, the keys being sent to your work. Locks have been changed. Please don't contact me. Owen. No fluff, no argument, no door left open. The texts that followed landed in waves, first confused, then pleading, then indignant. You're being irrational. It's not what you think. Brandon's just a friend. Nothing happened. If we talk, I can explain. Then the tone shifted. This is insane. You're ending everything over one misunderstanding? Pick up your phone. Owen ignored every single one. The security footage showed Kendra camping on the front steps until nearly 2 in the morning, crying, yelling, knocking on the door like it owed her something, peering into windows like he'd suddenly reverse every decision he'd made. Then came the voicemails. The first ones were soaked in emotion and confusion. The later ones crackled with righteous fury. And the final one, left at 2:30 in the morning, was the one Owen saved. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Maybe I've been settling all along. Brandon actually sees my worth. Don't come crawling back when you realize what you gave up. The morning after Kendra's porch vigil, Owen strolled into work feeling something he hadn't felt in longer than he could precisely remember. Genuinely, unambiguously good. His boss stopped by his desk, squinted at him like something was wrong, and asked if he was all right because he looked almost chipper for a Monday. Owen smiled and said he'd had a decent weekend, choosing not to add that it had been decent for exactly one of them. Around lunchtime, his phone rang. Linda, Kendra's mother, sweet woman, maker of excellent banana bread, who had apparently been recruited into the chaos by a sobbing phone call the night before. Linda had been told it was all a misunderstanding involving a man Kendra went to Cabo with. Owen calmly told her the truth. He'd seen the photos, read the messages, and the trip wasn't a girl's getaway. It was a couple's retreat, and he hadn't been Kendra's other half. Linda went quiet for a long moment, then sighed and admitted she and her husband had already had suspicions about Brandon because Kendra had mentioned him more often than felt normal. She'd assumed he was just a coworker. Owen told her the storage unit was prepaid and set up in Kendra's name, and as for where she slept from here, that was between her and whatever choices she'd made. When he hung up, he felt the brief flicker of guilt he'd expected. Poor Linda hadn't signed up for any of this, but it lasted exactly 5 minutes before the next round of Kendra's texts arrived. She accused him of invading her privacy by showing their conversations to her mother, accused him of stealing her belongings, and then informed him with apparent seriousness that Brandon believed the situation qualified as maltreatment and they were considering pressing charges. Owen nearly spit out his coffee. Brandon, the man who had spent months helping a woman cheat on her partner while knowing full well she wasn't single, was now positioning himself as the aggrieved party in a potential legal dispute? Owen forwarded everything to his friend Jake, a paralegal, who replied almost immediately, "Document everything. She's threatening you and confessing to cheating in the same text thread, and that's solid gold if she ever tries to follow through." Owen backed up screenshots to his hard drive, the cloud, and a USB drive. Later that evening, he posted a subtle Instagram story, just him and Bruno in the garage working on the Camaro, captioned, "Enjoying the calm. Sometimes it takes silence to realize what you've been missing." Within the hour, Vivian slid into his DMs with a carefully constructed, "Hope you two can work it out" message that was really just reconnaissance for Kendra. The next day brought an unexpected call from Kendra's dental clinic. She'd missed 2 shifts without calling in. Owen kept it brief and professional. "She's okay, going through personal things. Best to reach her directly." Then came the grocery store encounter with Jocelyn, who tried to evaporate into the avocado display when she spotted Owen in the cereal aisle. Owen pulled her into a calm, direct conversation and showed her a few of the photos. Kendra and Brandon at a candlelit dinner, at a hotel, taken 3 weeks before the Cabo trip. Jocelyn's face moved through confusion, horror, and fury in sequence. Kendra had told the whole friend group they'd broken up months ago and were just cohabiting until she found a new place. She'd lied to everyone equally, distributing the deception without favoritism, using each group of people as a different layer of cover for the same sustained performance. If Kendra had gambled her relationship, her living situation, and her self-respect on the assumption that Brandon was worth the cost, the universe moved quickly to clarify the math. The answer came through Owen's friend Tyler, who happened to work at the same gym where Brandon had been employed as a trainer. Tyler texted Owen with the barely contained excitement of someone delivering news they knew would land perfectly. Brandon had been fired. Not for one isolated incident or a single complaint, he'd been caught in a pattern of pursuing multiple clients simultaneously, and when several husbands discovered what had been going on, the confrontation exploded in the gym parking lot in what Tyler described as a total reality show meltdown. Owen read the message, set his phone down, and allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction that didn't require any performance to be genuine. Brandon had always been exactly what Owen suspected. Not an upgrade, not an adventure, not some thrilling alternative to the stability Owen represented. He was a serial pattern. Charm the attached, flood them with flattery until they ditch the partner, ride the fantasy until it expires, then pivot to the next available target. He wasn't a soulmate, he was demolition in athletic wear with a protein shake in hand. He operated on a business model built entirely on other people's vulnerabilities and his own complete lack of accountability. And Kendra, who had called Owen boring and referred to his reliability as though it were a personality defect, had traded a man who owned his home and honored his commitments for someone who apparently couldn't even hold a job. The consequences arrived at Owen's doorstep, literally, that very night. His doorbell rang, and one glance at the security camera confirmed what he already half expected. Kendra stood on the porch looking like she'd been through a tumble dryer on the extra spin cycle. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes the same ones she'd been photographed in 2 days earlier on Instagram, and her mascara had tracked down her face like war paint from a battle she'd clearly lost. Owen didn't go to the door. He activated the intercom system he'd installed during his home security upgrade and spoke to her through the mic, voice steady and entirely unmoved. He asked what she wanted. Her lip quivered. She said she'd made a huge mistake. Owen noted calmly that she had in fact made several huge mistakes and asked which specific one she was referencing tonight. She begged him to open the door. He told her the humiliation she was experiencing was entirely self-constructed and that he was simply declining to clean up the mess she'd made. That's when the tears came, the kind that a few weeks earlier might have softened him. But Owen had read every message, seen every photo, and listened to every voicemail. He heard her out through the intercom as she explained that Brandon had been seeing other women the entire time, even during Cago. He responded with a slow, deliberate fake gasp. The man who had helped her betray her boyfriend had turned out to be untrustworthy. Who could have possibly seen that coming? She called him cruel. He reminded her, into the mic, that she had called him dull, told Brandon he was just a fallback, treated his home like a free Airbnb, and planned her exit strategy while still splitting the grocery bill with him. He told her to leave his property or he'd call the police. She lingered for 5 more minutes, maybe hoping for a miracle, and then finally shuffled away down the steps, shoulders dropped, defeated. Kendra didn't go quietly into the aftermath. She arrived loud, with a barrage of morning texts that read like a greatest hits compilation of deflection and self-pity. "You're being unfair. It was one mistake. You're throwing away years for nothing." Then, the pressure shift. "You'll regret it when you're lonely and miserable. Hope you're proud." And finally, the appeal Owen genuinely could not read without laughing. "If you ever loved me, you'd help me through this instead of abandoning me when I need you most." He nearly spit out his coffee. The man she'd spent months calling boring, reliable in the tone of someone describing a backup appliance, and a placeholder she couldn't wait to replace, that man was now being asked to catch her when she fell. The answer was silence, and silence said everything that needed saying. Owen forwarded the full thread to Jake, who confirmed that what she was sending amounted to a harassment trail with a side of written confession, and that Owen could obtain a restraining order without breaking a sweat. The documentation was already done. Screenshots backed up across multiple devices, the cloud, and a USB drive parked safely in his garage. Just like that, as though the threat of consequences finally registered, the messages stopped. The calls ended. The doorstep appearances ceased. Life, which had been loud and chaotic and dishonest for far too long, went quiet. Owen heard through the grapevine that Kendra eventually moved back in with her parents once their home renovation wrapped up and landed a new position at a dental office on the far side of town. quieter life, less curated, both jobs because apparently running a dual lifestyle on someone else's stability had left her own finances in ruins. As for Brandon, the reports were predictably consistent with everything Owen had already understood about him. He'd relocated to Vegas with a woman he met at the gym shortly after being fired, left behind a trail of unpaid bills and unanswered texts, and vanished into whatever the next chapter of his particular pattern looked like. The playbook never changed. It just moved to a different city. Owen, meanwhile, found himself in a rhythm that felt almost startling in its normality. He finished restoring the Camaro, gave it a full polish, and entered it in a local car show where it placed third, a result that surprised him and delighted him in equal measure. Strangers stopping to ask whose car it was while he grinned like a man who had just been reminded why he'd started the project in the first place. He got back into the gym with real consistency, took up rock climbing, which he described as paying good money to be scared on a vertical wall, and cautiously re-entered the dating world. Nothing intense. Coffee meetups, honest conversations, women who laughed at the Cabo story instead of treating it as a competitive reference point. One afternoon at a grocery store, he found himself in the checkout line directly behind Vivian, who looked like she'd swallowed something vinegar-flavored and was trying very hard to appear casual. She fished for information with a gentle probe about Kendra's situation. Owen gave her the warmest, most serene non-answer he owned. Life was good, reality tends to bite, those were her choices, and watched Vivian's composure tighten like a lid someone was trying to seal over a pot that was already boiling. There's a particular kind of peace that only arrives after chaos has fully exhausted itself, after all the noise and the doorbell cameras and the voicemails and the porch vigils and the texts that cycle through every stage of grief before finally going silent. Owen found that peace gradually, then all at once, the way most good things in life tend to arrive. Not in a single cinematic moment, but in the accumulation of quiet mornings and uncomplicated evenings that start to feel like the default instead of the exception. The house, which had spent 8 months accommodating someone who treated it like a backdrop for a lifestyle she was performing for other people's benefit, settled back into what it actually was, his. The spare room became a home gym again. The garage breathed freely. The living room was arranged for function rather than filtered photo opportunities, and for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember, Owen could sit down on his own couch without calculating the lighting angles. Bruno, who had spent the better part of a year navigating ring lights, misplaced cosmetics, and a parade of guests who rarely acknowledged his existence, stationed himself permanently at Owen's feet, with the tail-wagging contentment of a dog who had finally gotten his person back. The Camaro got its moment, too. Owen took it out to a local show, polished, dialed in, everything he'd put into it across 2 years of weekend hours, finally visible in the way it sat and sounded and moved. It placed third, and when strangers stopped to ask who owned it, he answered with the quiet pride of someone who had built something real with his own hands and hadn't needed anyone else to validate it. He entered it in a second show a few weeks later. Third place again. It felt like a win both times. Dating, when he stepped back into it, turned out to be far less complicated than he'd expected once he stopped trying to rationalize red flags out of existence. Coffee with women who talked plainly and laughed genuinely. One of them heard the Cabo story and laughed so hard she nearly knocked over her cup, not at Owen's expense, but at the sheer audacity of the whole thing, which was exactly the kind of response that told him everything he needed to know. One morning he sat in the kitchen watching the Phoenix sun come up over the horizon, Bruno asleep at his feet, coffee warm in his hand, the Camaro visible through the garage window, and the house completely, entirely quiet. No group chats exploding at midnight, no passive commentary about the finishes or the square footage or whether the vibe was right, just his space, his terms, his calm. He thought about Kendra occasionally, not with bitterness, but with the detached clarity of someone who had learned something expensive and filed it under tuition. She had made her choices, so had Brandon. The world had a way of arranging consequences without Owen needing to engineer them. What he had decided, sitting in that garage with Bruno the night everything unraveled, was that the best response wasn't revenge, it was simply forward motion. Keep building, keep showing up, keep being the man who tiles his own bathroom, restores his own car, owns his own house, and doesn't apologize for any of it. Life continued. Bruno wagged his tail. The Camaro hummed like a beast. And Owen, he was living proof that the most powerful thing a man can do after being used as a landing pad is simply refuse to stay grounded.